So from the school attendance, we can support also the target 451, parity index for all education indicators, main source of drinking water for the target 611, and also sanitation target 621, type of lighting target 711. And from the occupation, we can support the target 831, proportion of informal employment in non-agricultural employment by sex. And this one also proxy school attendance and labor force status, which is a proportion of youth in an EET, not in education, employment, or training. From the question about occupation, age, and sex, it can support the target 871, proportion of a number of children age 5 up to 17 years engaged in child labor. And then from question about labor force status and industry, it can support target 922, manufacturing employment. And from the birth certificate ownership, it can support the target 1691, proportion of children under 5 years of age whose birth have been registered. So what about our next year? We still have next year population census, but only using sample, 5% sample of the total family in Indonesia. The questionnaire, we call it the long form questionnaire, or PC 2020 C2, consists of 99 questions, consists of a question about individual, migration, education, health, employment, housing, fertility, mortality, and also disability. So we can produce the demographic parameters more complex, more comprehensive from this census in 2021. And it can support this one in which is the indicators in black color. I already mentioned that we also can get it from our short form questionnaire, but we also can get it from our long form questionnaire. And for the black color, for the blue color, this one that only can produce from the long form questionnaire. We can get the information about the maternal mortality ratio, but we need to remember that maternal mortality ratio is a very rare cases. So with that number of sample, maybe we cannot produce it at the lowest level, but we still want to try our best to produce that maternal mortality ratio. We also can produce the under 5 mortality ratio, neonatal mortality ratio, rate, and also death rate to do the road traffic injuries, because we also collect information about cause of death. We can also produce the information about adolescent birth rate, because we collect information from for the women from age 10 and above, and also mortality rate attributed to unintentional poisoning, because from the information about cause of death, and also proportion of children under 5 years of age who are developmentally on track in health or disability. We apply the Washington Group framework in our census, so we collect some information for that about disability. And also the next one, this one already collect in the short form questionnaire as well. And the next one is the average hourly earning for female and male employees. We can get it from our long form questionnaire. And also unemployment rate, we can also get it. And then for the target 10 to 1 proportion of people living below 50% of median income, we can also get that information. And this one, how we can disaggregate the data from our PC 2020. For the white color, this one, we can disaggregate from the short form questionnaire. We can disaggregate it by age, sex, migration status, educational status, and then employment status, administrative area, and geographic location. Whereas from the long form questionnaire, there are 2 additional data disaggregation by disability status and by income. And for the last, Uh, the data collected in the population and housing censuses must serve a wide range of purpose and do not lend themselves to lengthy and detailed interviews, so that the amount of detail that can be provided on each individual subject is very limited, especially with the many types of data collection, such as in Indonesia. And for Indonesia, collecting more detailed information through the long-form questionnaire, sample census, surely come with consequences that some indicators maybe could not be produced up to the lowest level, especially for the rare cases, such as maternal mortality. So the SDGs can be realized only with strong global partnership and cooperation, not only in the global, but also in the regional, national, and also in the local level. Strong international cooperation is needed now more than ever to ensure that countries have the means to not only recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also can achieve the SDGs. So if we can refer to the goal 17, how to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development, which is the target in by 2020, how to enhance capacity building support to developing countries, including for least developed countries, and also small island developing states to increase significantly the availability of high quality and also timely and reliable data disaggregated by income, gender, age, race, ethnicity, migratory status, disability, geographic location, and other characteristics relevant. So I will end it with our tagline. This is our tagline in Indonesia in our population census 2020. Mari mencatat Indonesia, which means let's count Indonesia, because it is in line with the motto of the census, because everyone counts, and also in line as well with the SDGs motto, leave no one behind. Thank you, Ms. Lee. That's all my presentation.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Ms. Daya, for your wonderful sharing your experience regarding Indonesian population census and SDG indicators. I hope to visit Indonesia. Now let's move on to our final speaker. I'd like to invite and introduce our next speaker, Dr. Rachel Snow. Dr. Rachel Snow received her PhD in population science from Harvard School of Public Health in 1988, where she was subsequently a MacArthur Fellow in Population and Development Studies and Assistant Professor in Population and International Health. She also taught on University of Heidelberg in Germany. Thereafter, she was a tenure faculty at the University of Michigan. She was also the leading author of United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, 20-year review of the International Conference on Population and Development. Altogether, Dr. Rachel Snow has about 30 years experience conducting research on this area. Dr. Rachel Snow, we are waiting to hear your presentation. Now, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. I wanted to make sure you can hear me just fine.
Yeah, fine.
Okay, great. It's a pleasure to be here, and I especially appreciated the prior two speakers. And I think what's very interesting and fun today is that as we talk about the work we're doing at UNFPA, you will appreciate that we are very much leaning on IPUMS for their data. So I think the combination of the two these presentations is very nice. So what I want to start with today is the target 1718 of the 2030 agenda. And just to remind us all that that goal inside, this target inside this SDG was to enhance data capacity and statistical systems in developing countries by 2020. And that's a challenging reminder because we are now at the end of 2020. And I think we can all agree that there's a long way to go still to fully enhance data capacity and statistical systems in many of the low and middle income countries of the world. But this is, of course, a high priority for UNFPA. So our overall population data strategy is based on 3 pillars of work. And one of those is very much to improve data quality and scope, and particularly with a great emphasis on census. We do also some work on civil registration, but as you may know, we are in 130 countries across the world. And for the last 5 decades, UNFPA has been a primary support to governments worldwide in the operation of the census. And in this respect, it was very nice to hear from Indonesia and to hear all about your adjustments under the COVID circumstance. So congratulations on that work. But in addition to promoting population data in scope and quality, we have 2 other priorities. And one of those is to indeed share more population data, and to do so capitalizing on institutions like IPUMS, and then to, in fact, create a population data platform that will, again, democratize data a bit more and give more countries the tools, the analytic and visualization tools to meet our 3rd goal, which is, of course, to use more population data much more effectively. And it may be worth mentioning that there was an evaluation of the 2010 round of census conducted by UNFPA and external partners, which concluded that there was a great deal of work to help countries undertake the census, but there was a very serious lack of capacity strengthening to help governments actually use those data in creative and effective ways. So again, it was great to see the presentation from Indonesia, but we have many countries, of course, where we find that those the capacity is not what we just saw in Indonesia, but still very much needing strengthening. Census, of course, is essential. I don't need to tell that to you in this particular meeting, but only to remind that in many of the poorest countries, it remains really the foundational data source. And why? Because civil registration remains extremely thin on the ground, particularly in the continent of Africa. I was interested to see the estimate by Dr. Sharkar about the number of indicators that use a census, because in our estimation, that's as high as 107. So we should compare notes on that. And that's more than census. It's that requires some comprehensive population denominator. But we calculate that number is very high, as much as 107. And yet what we find, of course, as I mentioned, is so many governments do have shortfalls in modern methods of census, in particular, any sort of geospatial transformation, the capitalizing on geospatial dimensions of census. Often that's about human resources, institutional lack of capacity, and particularly we see shortfalls in this use of data. And what that, just to remind us of the COVID disruption, it was so interesting to hear about Indonesia and your adjustments. This we track on a very routine basis, on quarterly basis, what is the status of the 2020 census round in countries, largely to keep on track with those who are asking for support from us. And we do that also to serve our colleagues at the World Bank and colleagues at the US Census Bureau. We compare notes, we work directly with countries. So in that kind of dashboard, what we saw, of course, very, very profoundly was the extent of the disruptions due to COVID. Now, 59 countries in the world were expected to conduct a census in 2020 and another 68 in 2021. So of course, these are the absolute peak 2 years of the 2020 census round. Of these countries, 63 have confirmed postponements, and many remain uncertain and indeed are making adjustments and trying to figure out alternate ways, short forms, as you suggested, these sort of remote data collection methods. So adjustments are being made worldwide. Now, a priority for us when we talk about modernizing the census is absolutely to increase the use of GIS in census. And this goes from everything from using satellite imagery and doing much more sophisticated work for the digital or cartographic step in the census, but also to use GIS in census operations itself to actually help enumerators in the field make sure they're in the right locations, for people at headquarters to look indeed in the same country, for supervisors to make sure and see in fairly quick time whether the enumerator indeed is in the right, has crossed a boundary, is in the right location. But then of course, it's really to undertake spatial analysis to capitalize on those geotagged census data. And in fact, even to enable dissemination. So this requires an adoption of a lot more mixed methods. It means that there is indeed a call for much more enabling legal environments, but also protective legal environments. So we're finding a lot of countries still do not have legislation to sort of regulate how geotagged data can in fact be shared or not shared. And this is an interesting and important area, I think, for all of us to attend to, because the building up of that legislation is extremely important to protect, to both maximize the use of data while protecting privacy. We are also very engaged in population estimates where they are needed. And for us, that's in areas of a country that in fact cannot be enumerated, be that for reasons of violence or recent climate disruptions, etc. We are undertaking very active support in simple things like the procuring of tablets and the sharing of tablets. So UNFPA serves as a broker between a number of countries where tablets which have been purchased and used in one country then are retrieved, fully cleaned, and then redelivered to another country. And this is important, of course, for essential cost savings. And that some of that has gone well. We know also the African Union is now likewise serving as a broker to help promote this sharing. And we do see some really significant activity on that front. The other is that to use satellite imagery is one thing. And a lot of countries are very, anyway, put off, and understandably, by the cost of some of the highest resolution satellite imagery. So it may be possible to use publicly available imagery in more rural or suburban areas. But when it comes to actually being able to apply imagery to dense urban areas, of course, much more high resolution imagery is required. And one of the things we've found very helpful for governments is to help them negotiate lower prices through a range of other partnerships we have, including with the Gates Foundation, to secure, and the GGAM within the UN, to be able to secure more affordable high resolution imagery for countries. We do fund chief technical advisors, and we do a lot of training of a roster of our consultants. And this round of the census, a lot of that has been about this modernization of census and bringing many technical advisors on census up to speed with what's possible with geospatial methodologies. And so that's a whole series of capacity strengthening. And then again, of course, supporting the legal legislation and privacy issues that I just described a while ago. We also are very keen through our programs to encourage the integration of census within the overall population data system. And I mentioned in the title here that we try to take this whole system approach. Census, of course, is one critical dimension, but it is one critical dimension of that full population data system. And we're very pleased that with funding from the Canadian government, we have a program called the Converge program. And that's really about the quality assessment of civil registration, which of course often is based on the utilization of census as combined with civil registration to be able to assess coverage and quality. And so we're encouraging, as the census is achieved this round, to really use the census data to then do that quality assessment of the status of the civil registration. Allow me to add on this point that we see a great deal of interest in work on birth registration. And as we were just reminded, there is indeed, in fact, an SDG indicator encouraging countries in birth registration. And what we find is, however, that death registration has been a bit neglected, and the most serious neglect and I think in the overall development community has been to pay attention to marriage registration. So we are trying to kind of preferentially focus a bit more on death registrations and marriage registrations, where we see some of the most significant gaps, particularly in the least developed countries. We also are encouraging countries that are either humanitarian preparedness countries or humanitarian response countries to use the census, this latest round of census in particular, of course, to create common operational data sets in population statistics. And we spent in the course of this year, we've prepared 78 of those with partner governments, and those are then available to the OCHA website, so that when and if a humanitarian crisis occurs, there is very up-to-date population data by locality, by age and sex, so that the number of people affected by an event can be very rapidly assessed, and the number of, let's say, food kits and health kits, et cetera, that need to be brought into a humanitarian crisis can be much more precisely estimated, not only assuring that there's some fiscal savings in those purchases, but also to make sure that nobody lacks a kit, a health kit that they might need in a circumstance like that. We have a very exciting project called the Grid Cube, the Grid 3 project, which stands for Geo-Referenced Infrastructure and Demographic Data for Development. And this is a project that we undertake with the University of Southampton, WorldPop, Columbia University, and the Gates Foundation, and the UK government. And this has to date focused principally on African countries, but it has been really critical for increasing both the capacity strengthening available, some of that satellite imagery purchasing, and making sure that if countries indeed lack census data, we can provide assistance with some of the model-based population estimates. This is an example of grid work, in fact. So this is from Nigeria, but it's an example of using a combination of micro censuses on the ground in Nigeria, plus a whole series of satellite imagery work, so locating settlements through the imagery, and then from this developing a model for population estimates. And this has been created for the entire country of Nigeria. Nigeria had a last census in the 2010 round, but the last has been delayed in the last few years. So now this provides not a substitute for census. It doesn't have anything near the volume or the quality and range of indicators, but it does provide estimates of the population by location. And that alone, as we know, can be enormously helpful for countries. So this is an example of some of the grid work that's underway in Africa. And another phenomena here is we can use the census data to visualize census data using 3D maps. This is some work that's been done very recently in Malawi. And you can see that there's, in fact, in 3 dimensions, you get a whole range of different sort of views of a particular country. And this indeed, on the left-hand side, you can see the population density or the people per square kilometer. And the density is in, you can see Lilongwe and Blantyre and Zomba. And what we find is that when working with ministers and a lot of sort of senior decision makers, visualization is enormously helpful. You know, tabular data, a lot of the data that we live and breathe and are very comfortable with is, of course, has a language of its own. And what we find increasingly is that the visualization of data is enormously important for engaging sector ministers who may themselves not be, for example, particularly strong data people. But let me focus now, I think, of the theme for this session, which is really on improving the use of data for impact, and give you a few examples that we've been working with. This is an example from Zambia. And in the middle of this on the red map, what you see is the percentage of child marriage. Okay, so this is in itself indeed an SDG indicator. So what you see is the percentage of women who are 18 to 24 who were married or in union before age 18. And that gives you a very nice display, of course, of this percentage of women who experienced a child marriage. But the power, of course, of census is that when we overlay this, these percentages with the actual population density across the districts of Zambia, the picture changes. So if the government is really keen to prioritize in what districts, which districts should we be working in order to prevent child marriage, where are the largest number of girls at risk of child marriage? That is in the lower right column. This is the combination of the SDG display with population denominators. And suddenly we see that actually it's different districts that the government might want to prioritize. Okay, so I think this is an example of where the power of census is really crucial. Another example here, and this is from Indonesia, was some population density that was done in medium and mid-high flood and landslide zones in a portion, in a part of Indonesia. And you see again, you know, the distribution. This is again integrating census data to think about climate change adaptation and where indeed individuals may be at greater risk in any given location, let's say along the seaways in terms of flooding, but in this case also for landslides. And we find, of course, with more and more governments attentive to the risks of climate change and now absolutely experiencing a greater climate events, the demand and interest in using census to be able to anticipate and say, well, where are all the older people, for example, living alone in a flood zone? Type of question that we are challenged to answer is very, very important and impressive in terms of preparing and anticipating who might be in a circumstance where they would be indeed at risk. There seems to be someone else on the line from my side. Professor Lee, I have another sound of someone speaking on my side.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, okay. I don't know if someone we can mute that. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is something we've done most recently, again with the government of Malawi, remembering that UNFPA, in addition to being a population data agency, is very much an agency focused on sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. And this is hugely important for us to be able to start using the census data and to assess who has access to sexual and reproductive health services and who does not. So this is using the last census from Malawi. And first on the far left, you see just a distribution of the population across the country. And then we were able to capitalize on the recent SPA survey, which is a survey, comprehensive survey of all health facilities, to actually map the sexual and reproductive health service locations. So you begin to see how well the distribution matches the population population distribution. In the next one, you can see some, the green dots are high coverage where the population is within, that's living within 5 kilometers of a service, for example. You see lots of red. And then on the far right, when everything is combined, you see the number of people who are located more than 20 kilometers from a, in this case, it's a health service that not only provides antenatal care, but to use a measure of quality, we could take out of those data from the health sector. In fact, they have something very basic like syphilis screening. You know, a service that should be universally available for anyone in antenatal care. And this was important because when we first initially mapped who has access to antenatal care, the map had a lot less red on it. It didn't look too bad. But then when you add the question, who has access to an antenatal service that includes syphilis screening, in fact, what you saw was many red districts start to emerge across the country, pointing out that still access to a high quality antenatal service remains still a problem for many women in the country. So this is the kind of detailed work that census allows when we're capitalizing on that geospatial data and then combining it with other geocoded data, in this case, like Malawi, the health sector data. And this has been extremely useful, not only for our country office there, but also the Ministry of Health, of course, in the government. Now, when it comes to sharing data, we've been building something called the Population Data Platform. And I think the central image here is the most important, and that's the layers. So as I've been talking about the layer of census data, if it's lacking the estimated population numbers, then other spatial data like the location of hospitals, roads, anything that's going to give us information about access. And then if we have them also, you know, demographic dividend indicators, STG indicators, any humanitarian indicators that may be required. And this layering of data has really been made possible in part because of the partnership that we have with IPUMS. And so we've been capitalizing, we have a new partnership with them to use the IPUMS data as part of that population base layer. We also have relationships with countries we've worked with for a long time, and be reassured, Dr. Sarkar, we are consistently advocating, please share your census data with IPUMS. They'll harmonize it and then it can go into our platform. So this is a really important set of relationships, I think, that for all of us, and indeed ideally for the country, because now we're talking to national statistical offices and seeing the potential to help them build national portals, which include these sorts of layered data. Our main partner in terms of the geospatial work is Esri, you know, the global leader in geospatial data. That's been really crucial too as a critical partnership. And I think I'm showing you a map which you actually saw in the IPUMS presentation, and that is our COVID-19 population vulnerability dashboard, which was the first iteration out of this growing population data platform. And indeed, this was something important immediately when COVID hit. We started working on this with Esri. It has indeed IPUMS data inside it. It also has population estimates, the World Pop estimates, again, for countries that didn't have available census data. It has the Johns Hopkins data, as I think Dr. Sarkar already mentioned. And it includes some readiness data from the health sector, from the WHO, from the World Bank. So again, how many countries, what is the density of ICUs? What is the density of hospital beds and health workers in countries? So you can start to see even subnationally where, say, the distribution of older persons who are at risk, where they do not have, for example, piped water or live in dense slums. And yet again, also there's very limited health worker density. So you can start to see hotspots in countries. And in some of those, we can see now that we've had these data, you can start to see how that has tracked along with outcomes and some very substantial risk. What this doesn't offer you is what the mitigation exercises were and the policies that were put in place by governments, which is of course a hugely important factor in the ultimate risk of people. But this has been very, very helpful. This is just again another example. This was monitoring the impact of COVID on census. I showed you a summary slide. We have a dashboard. This has now gone public where you can actually track censuses and the schedule of censuses. And here what you can see, it's on some special pages, is the impact of COVID in terms of postponements, adjustments, etc. So it was a COVID impact on census. Our capacity strengthening activities are wide.